Hello and welcome to my first Lightroom course and probably also my first YouTube video. Maybe it's my second one, I don't know yet. My name is Alex. I'm a 27-year-old travel photographer and storyteller. 3 months ago I was an IT management consultant, but I quit my job, quit my apartment, sold most of all my things and started traveling the world full-time by the beginning of 2022. And right now we are at the end of January 2022, so I've been traveling for almost a month. Right now I'm sitting in sort of like a jungle area in Sri Lanka, which is my first destination. And I basically decided that I don't want to spend the rest of my 20s inside of an office. And instead I wanted to travel the world and experience different cultures and just live life a little bit more. This course is my first contribution to the photography community here on YouTube. I have been shooting photos, taking photos almost all of my life, I would like to say. Since I was a kid I got my first digital camera and have been shooting ever since. Never really used the photos for much, shot a lot with my phones growing up as well as the smartphones emerged. But then about 4 years ago I bought my first DSLR. My job allowed me to save up for a camera and I really wanted to start traveling. But since I didn't have that many people to travel with, I decided to get a camera and use that as my way of exploring and traveling around. And since then I've just become better and better and decided to try and make it a living. So that's what I'm doing right now. And my contribution is also because I want other people to be able to do the same thing. If you want to do this kind of digital nomad life and traveling the world, then a creative skill like photography or videography could be a really good one to actually get started with the travel and exploring the world. And it could also just be that you would like to see how you edit photos with Lightroom. You might want to do it on your vacation, shoot photos and just become better at it in general. For me it's all about telling stories and creating memories. Some of my photos are some of the best memories that I have, and every time I look at a particular photo I can almost with all of them remember where I was and what feelings and emotions went through my body and my mind at the time. And that's what I really just love about photography. So that's why I wanted to share at least my knowledge with the rest of you and hopefully contribute to making it a lifestyle, at least growing your photography skills with this as well. When I first started photography for real, like 3 or 4 years ago, as said, Lightroom was still a little bit confusing. I had been using Photoshop since I was a kid, but again I never really used the photos for anything, so it wasn't that advanced. But I knew my way around the Adobe programs. Yet, starting with Lightroom, jumping into it, understanding all the ups and downs, features, tips and tricks on Lightroom and how to actually do it, and all the different sections and what they mean and which order you should maybe use to edit, and yeah, just get a feel of it. Because until you understand the program and understand the different features, it's going to be difficult for you to actually use it as a creative tool. It's not until you actually understand and use the tool freely that you can start being really creative. Until then you can sort of get your way around with tutorials, but it's not really your creative sense as much as when you are so familiar with the program that you can just tweak different bits and you know your way around what looks good, what looks bad, what different sections and features should you tweak at to actually get the result that you want. So this is the basics course, just going through how to start up Lightroom the first time, what is a catalog, what folder structure should you use. This is something I've heard in a lot of courses and tutorials that I've seen myself, the folder thing. It's super boring but very important, and I've just started a new folder structure now that I started traveling, and from my 3 years of experience I just had it in one catalog and didn't really or put a great order to my different folders back then. So it was kind of like a little bit of a struggle to find photos sometimes, and it got a little bit hectic and the catalogs can grow really fast. So we'll go quickly through my recommendations for folders. You can do it however you want, but my recommendations will be here in a minute. You can just skip that part if you don't really feel like it. This course is in 3 parts, so this is the first one, the introduction. Then we go through opening Lightroom for the first time, creating your catalog, some photo structures both around the catalog, and how to order your photos as well, either from inside of Lightroom or maybe from doing the photos yourself and importing yourself and then connecting them to Lightroom as well. And then the last part, I will take you through the different sections that are in Lightroom, and I will do a basic edit while doing that as well. Maybe a couple of edits depending on the different features, because some features are more neat for some things than others. But go through a basic edit so that you can get an idea of how Lightroom actually works and what the different sections means, and also just my idea of how to do a basic edit. And the basic edit won't get you to the level of some of the photos you might have seen on Instagram, because that takes a little more tweaking, but it'll get you the basics. And when you get going with the basics and you start to understand how to do the base edit, then you can start to apply the more advanced techniques as well. And as soon as you have all of that set, it'll be fairly quickly for you to edit some really great and amazing photos. So let's jump into Lightroom for the first time. The first time you open Lightroom, it'll probably not look like this. It'll probably be a prompt of creating your first catalog. And a catalog is sort of your library for your photos and everything. So Lightroom manages all that. So your catalog is basically all the data on your edits and on your photos. But the cool thing about Lightroom is that it doesn't actually edit your photos. It stores information on the edit inside of Lightroom, and then when you export a photo with your edit, it creates a new photo from the photo and the edit itself. But if you go and look up your photo, whether it being a raw photo or JPEG, it will still stay the same even though you edit it inside of Lightroom. It's not until you export it that you actually get the edit itself. So therefore, the catalogs is very, very important. It's a very important part of Lightroom itself and basically the entire thing. So to get started and to sort of like illustrate that we have a catalog, I will create a new catalog. And this is probably what it's going to look like, and you want to store it in a good place where it's safe and where you can find it again, because if you lose your catalog or if it's corrupted or anything like that, you will basically lose all your edits as well. I haven't had a catalog corrupt yet, but do suggest that you actually save it in a good place. So what I do is I store it in my iCloud, and I have my photography folder, which is basically my catalogs. I have different catalogs. My own personal one is my travel one that I use most. I have some different ones. This is my old catalog. It's called 2019 but it's actually going from I think the end of 18 and until 2021. I'm trying to make a new structure for it to make sure that it's much better now. But for the example of this course, I am just going to create a new folder in here and call it Lightroom Basics, because that's the course that we're making right now. And within that, I will call it Lightroom Basics. This is the name of the catalog itself, and this is just the folder that I created. It might actually create a folder for it yourself, but now I did it, and you can always move it out if you now have 2 folders after this. So you click create, and Lightroom shuts down, and it opens again. For me at least, yours will probably, it might shut down or restart, it might just go directly into the catalog. You can see the catalog name up here. We have Lightroom Basics, which is my new catalog. Right now it says no photo selected because we basically have nothing inside of Lightroom right now. Before we move on to actually importing something, I will go quickly through how Lightroom looks, but before that, just a few notes on the photo structure. So as said, I have my iCloud drive that I use. You can use Google Drive, you can use whatever you want, OneDrive, Dropbox, another cloud storage. But I suggest you use a cloud storage because it is so crucial that you actually save your catalogs, and the fact that you have it in the cloud. It will sync whenever you're online, and it will just make it easier to save it. Just make sure that your cloud storage is something that you have in your desktop as well, like I have here, so that it's both available online and offline. So I have a few ones. I have my client projects down here. I have my personal catalogs, which is my travel. I have some of my tattoo, and I have my old one as said before as well. So I'm trying to structure it now into like smaller catalogs. And I'm making some for my courses as well, because I don't want all the clutter and I don't want to look for everything. So this is the easier way to do it, for me at least, to structure into smaller catalogs and then just open the catalogs as we go. And I would suggest you do the same. My mistake was to put everything inside one catalog, and it got a little bit heavy, and I think the file size is fairly big as well. You can see it's almost 500 megabyte, which is not a lot, but it will stack up over time, and I just think it's better to split it out. The second note I have on folders is, so this was for our catalogs. I would suggest structuring them into whatever makes sense for you. And then on my external drive, that's where I store my photos, and I suggest you do sort of the same thing. So I have my travel folder within 2022, and right now I'm in Sri Lanka, as said earlier in the introduction. So this is where I have my folder of that as well. One thing is that you can actually create the folders from inside of Lightroom and thereby add them to the library immediately, which is what I do normally. I'll show you how that works. But you can also just create the folder structure in here and then add them in Lightroom later on. But just try and stay structured. The cool thing when you import into Lightroom is that you can make it save the date. So now I have Sri Lanka and I have the different locations that I've been in. And then every time I import new photos from my SD card, it's structured automatically into these folders of dates, so I can always find my photos. But inside of Lightroom I can also just click on Sri Lanka and then I'll get all my photos from there, or just, for example, Digwella, and then have all the photos from inside of that. So that was just a quick note on the different photo structures. I'd really suggest you split it up. I split it up into travel, and I'll do it into years as well. As you can see, 2022, I'm actually doing it entirely in years, and then my client projects as well, just to have it structured and have it in different folders to make sure that it's easy to find everything, and the corresponding catalog, it's easy to find and browse through your photos as well. But let's have a quick look inside of Lightroom at first. Before I import any photos, I will just quickly take you through the basics of how it looks and what we are looking at right now. I won't take you through everything. I'll just take you through the basics as said and the pieces that I use, because I don't use all the functionality in here. We have a top bar, we have a left bar, we have the middle, then we have a right bar, and then we have the bottom here. Some of it changes within the different sections that you can choose up here. Some of it stays the same. So the middle and the bottom will more or less stay the same all the time. The same with the top here with the menu. Whereas the left and the right side, which controls what things we do and what things we see, that will change depending on the menu that we're in. Today we'll go through the library and the develop tab. The develop tab is where we are editing our photos. So when we have imported some photos in a minute, that's when I'll take you through a basic edit in the develop tab. So this one won't change much, and if you need more space on your screen, you can always hide it. You can actually do that with all the panels, and then you are just left with your photo in the end. Sometimes I like to hide the bottom and the top if I'm doing a bigger edit, but most of the time I'll just leave them all on, to be honest, and just work from this. The middle stays the same as said, no photo selected. This is where you see your photos. The only difference is that when you're in library mode, you can double click the photo and either have a grid view where you can view all the photos, or you can double tap it again and then view a single image at a time, whereas when you're in the develop tab, you will only see one photo at a time. And the same thing with the film roll down here is where you're going to see the photos of the folder that you're in right now. The left side shows us our catalog, so you can see all your photos in the catalog. You can see the sync photos if you do sync to Adobe Cloud through Lightroom. You can view it on your mobile phone, your smartphone, or your iPad. You can also do quick collections, and you can see your previous import. Below you will have your folders, We'll see that in a minute. And you can make some collections as well. That could be all your photos of waterfalls. You can save them into a collection. It could be all the photos that you want to make prints of. You can save them into a collection and won't remove them from the folders. It'll basically just create another folder or a virtual folder for those as well inside of Lightroom to make Lightroom tell you that, to have that inside of Lightroom. Alright, so on the right we have a few different options as well. You can do some quick develop, you can do keywords on your photos, make keyword lists, you can put in some metadata, and you can do comments as well. So when you want to import some photos, you go to File, and then you can click on Import Photos and Video. I don't know actually why it says video, because I can always only import photos, but this is the button you click on. If you insert an SD card into your computer or buy an adapter and you have Lightroom open like this, it'll automatically pop up the import section, which is quite nice. That's how I usually do it, but if you don't have that available, or if you already inserted your SD card and you want to take it out or for whatever reason, you can import them directly. Also, if you have photos located on your storage already, your external hard drive or your internal hard drive, then you can use this method as well. So we choose import, and normally if I had put in an SD card, that would be available over here as well. But for now we just have, I have made a folder. So this is the folder structure we saw before, and I have my courses, and inside of that I have my Lightroom basics, where I have the free photos that we'll be using today. Normally when I import photos from my SD card to my hard drive, I'll use the copy function that copies the photos from your SD card and into a desired folder over here. So you choose this right section, you choose what's going to happen with the file. You can do file handling, build smart previews. They take up a lot of storage, so I don't do that myself. You can make sure that it don't import suspected duplicates, so it'll look for duplicates already from your import and make sure that it doesn't import twice. You can also make a copy if you want to do that. And you can do some file renaming. So what I normally do is I have my custom settings, and it'll take the date and then the shoot name that I give it, and then just increasing the number from 1 and then onwards. So this could be Lightroom course, and then if we import the photos, then that will be the name for it. The same thing goes on with destination. Here is where you choose where to store photos. So normally when I import my travel photos, I'll go to travel, I'll select my folder, Sri Lanka for example, do Tequila, and you can see it adds the different folders if I have not imported the photos yet. And then it will add them to that folder within either the desired date that it's already been, if it's shot previously, or just add a new folder with a new date, like it's done up here because we have an old photo, and then add it in that folder, create that folder and add it in there. But for our course, we actually already have the photos inside, so I'm just adding the photos basically to the Lightroom catalog right now. So I will change the setting to add instead of copy, and that removes the destination thing over here. But that's how I normally do it when I import through my SD card. So now we just want to add these 3 photos to our catalog, and by then we just say import. And that's obviously how you would do it as well if you needed to add photos to your catalog that you already have. And inside of Lightroom here, if you want to show the parent folders, you can do that. That's what I normally have on, so that I can see, okay, we have 2002, we have the course. Normally it'd be 2022, sorry, Sri Lanka, and then the city, as you saw before. So that's the way that normally it's much bigger, the one that I have here. But for this sake, we have now our library. And as you can see from what I said before, if you select one, we'll get a preview up here. Usually preview is quicker to load up here. And then you have all your photos in library mode. As said, we have the grid mode. And then we have our catalog, or like our film roll down here as well, which is just a folder. So no matter where I click up here, this will change and this will change as well. But this will just show us what photos we have inside. And you can double click on the photos right here, and then we get them in the full size. and then we can browse through them with the arrow keys to the right, to the left, to jump between the photos, and you can see that we're jumping between the photos down here. Right, this was everything for part 2. So this was our walkthrough through the library, through the folder structures, through the catalogs, and now we will jump into creating some edits. Alright, let's get started with some editing. Before we start though, let me just quickly show you what the panels have changed into inside of our Develop tab. So as said, the top, middle and bottom hasn't changed at all, but the left and the right side has changed. So when we select the photo, that will still be what's showing up here. But then now you have your presets. You've maybe heard about that before, maybe not. It's basically what you know as filters from Instagram. So it's a pre-edit. So when we go through the tabs in a minute, you can save your edit and then save it as a preset. You can also export it, and some people sell them. You can also buy presets and import them, but that basically means that you click on it and then it applies those settings to your photo, and you have your base edit or your filter or basically your preset on it. Then we have the snapshots, which is the possibility to, during your edit, to take a snapshot of a certain place that you are in your edit, or maybe you've edited your photo and you really like it. You can take a snapshot, then you can reset it and you can edit it again in a different way, and then you can go back to the snapshot again and see how you edited it before. A little bit like saving a preset, but just saving a snapshot of where the edit is at this point. You have your history, which will show you the history of what you've gone through, so what you've clicked on, what you've edited, what you've scrolled through on the sliders. And then in the bottom we have our collections, which is the same as we saw before in the library. So it gives you the ability to actually switch between different collections while you're in the Develop tab. Because what you can't do is select different folders when you're in the Develop tab. So you need to go back to your library, choose a different folder if you need to choose something different, and then jump back into the Develop tab to edit. So the right side. On the top we have our histogram. If you don't know what the histogram is, I will do a video on it later. And if I haven't done it yet, you can find it on my channel. Then you can definitely find a description of what a histogram is in another video on YouTube or on the web, just searching for it. But basically, really quickly, you have your blacks on the left, you have your shadows next, you have your midtones, you have your highlights, and you have your whites, which is what the different parts and elements that the photo consists of. And in the histogram you'll see different colors in a minute, which shows you what colors are in the different areas of the photo. And if you have something peaking in the left side or peaking in the right side, that means that you have something that's completely blown out in the white or completely darkened out in the blacks, which means that there's no detail left in those areas at all. It's just pure black or pure white for that matter. Then below that we have some different features, and then we have our different sections. The features we'll come back to in the end, but before I start the edit, I just want to show you that your sections probably won't look like this as the beginning, because I rearranged mine to fit the way that I edit and the flow that I edit in. So my suggestion is, if you want to follow along, you can right click and then choose Customize Develop panel, click on that, and then you can rearrange it into this particular order, and that's how I go through my edits and how I think it makes sense basically to edit your photos and to go through it chronologically. So you can just pause the video here and then change your order to it as well, or you can just leave it with the default order if you don't want to change it up. Doesn't really matter, you just need to jump a little bit more if you follow along while you watch this video. Alright, let's get into it. Let's choose our first photo. This photo we won't actually edit. This is just for the purpose of showing one of the first panels. But what the first panel that I have is lens correction. By the way, a quick note is that I have it in solo mode, so I can only open one panel at a time. I like it that way so that it's a little more neat. But let's jump into the lens corrections now. I have it set on remove chromatic aberrations, which is some color fringing that you can get around the corners of your photo with some cameras or in some different conditions maybe. So this helps just to remove that. You don't want them anyway, so it's a good way just to click that off, and that Lightroom will help you with that. And then I have enabled profile corrections on as well, which means that it detects what camera and what lens I shot it with, and it'll help correct the image in terms of how it looked. So this photo particularly was shot with a wide lens, which means that you can see if I don't have my profile corrections on, it looks more dark and it is a little bit more distorted because it's shot at 35 millimeters. You can see that up here. So this helps with correcting it a little bit from the beginning. This is not a tab that I normally go into. I just make sure that these two are checked, which they always are, and then I actually just leave this tab be. What you can do sometimes is that if your photo is still a little bit distorted, you can go in here, you can actually help the distortion a little bit. So you can drag it to the left or the right. You can see how that changes the distortion of the photo. I'll just leave it at 100 for now and move on to the next one. The next one is the transform tool, and that's actually why we are on this photo right now, because if you shoot indoors, for example, and you shoot with a wide lens like I've been doing here, sometimes it's difficult to get all the lines in the photo correct. Not saying necessarily that this looks bad. You can correct it by choosing the crop tool, and then you can actually try and adjust for it. But what I will suggest you do instead, if you need the more lines to be aligned in here, you can use the guided tool in the transform tool, which allows you to then drag some lines across your photo. I'll just need to see where it turns up like that. And then you can do the same, for example, with the table down here. We'll drag it across here. And then that corrects the photo, tries to correct the photo so that these lines are both straight and the photo itself looks a little more straight. In this case, it doesn't necessarily look that good, but you can use more lines and guidelines to make it better. This is just a quick way to help you do that and to correct the image in more ways. But besides that, I don't really use the transform tool much. Sometimes I use the guided ones. Mostly I'll just use the crop tool to slightly rotate the photo if that's needed, depending on how I shot it. So these are the two first ones, but it makes sense to start with lens corrections and then go to transform to do that on your photos to begin with, and then move on afterwards. That was just to show that with this photo. So I think the main photo we will edit today is the sunset shot. This is one of my signature shots. I love to shoot sunsets, so I thought this was fitting as well. The next panel that we have is our tone curve. And the tone curve is built just like the histogram, with your blacks, your shadows, your midtones, highlights, and whites. And what this basically does is this line determines that this just goes straight through it now, but you can do adjustments to it to balance out some more contrast. And since this photo is shot in RAW, it's looking a little more pale right now in terms of how it was in real life. So it needs an edit to actually look great again, you could say. So the most common thing to do with the tone curve is to do 3 points and make a slight S-curve. An S-curve because you drag up the highlights just a little bit, and then you drag down the shadows just a little bit. You can see how that creates a lot more contrast already. And that already makes the photo look a lot better. It's definitely not done, but it introduces some more contrast. You can play around a lot with this. What I will suggest for you is to leave it as like a small S-curve to begin with. Look at how your shadows are affected and how much you want to drag it down. Just do slight adjustments to begin with. Maybe leave the midtones as B in the beginning, in the middle, but sometimes actually drag them up or down as well. For this time, we'll just leave them in the middle and just do Command C to get that back. And now we have a slight S-curve. We'll drag this down a little bit more. And why I like to do this first is to create the contrast in the photo before we get to the basics panel, which is the next one we click on now. This one has a lot of sections and settings, so let's go through it rather quickly to not have this tutorial be way too long. But basically you have your temperature up here, which controls the temperature of the photo. You have your tint, which you can edit afterwards as well. And if you have a raw photo, you have a lot more capability to actually change these things without looking really bad or like without destroying the photo, as it is raw and contains a lot more information than if it was a JPEG. So if you have shot with a white balance that was slightly off, maybe you shot with a cloudy setting and it was actually sunny, then you might want to drag it up a little bit to make it warmer. You might want to drag it down as well. You can also do this just for artistic purposes. Maybe you think this looks better, but I will just leave it be for now. What I usually do is then come down to this section of the tone. Exposure, I always try to get right in camera, so I will leave that be to begin with. Sometimes I do slight adjustments later on if I want the photo to be a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, but most often I'll just leave it because this is one of the parts that will destroy the photos the quickest. If you turn up or down the exposure, it definitely messes with the photo, and you see how the histogram changes as well in terms of the exposure up there. And the contrast slider I'll leave alone as well. I rarely use that for my entire edits. Sometimes I do it if I do some masking for certain areas, but the contrast slider is basically doing the same thing as we did with the tone curve before. The tone curve is just a more precise way for you to actually do the contrast in your photo, whereas this will just add contrast to the entire photo less intelligently than you can do with the tone curve. And then we have our highlights, our shadows, our whites and our blacks. And you can actually see it's highlighting the areas in the histogram as well. And this, my usual way of doing it is sort of like the same thing as we did in our tone curve. Let's often drag up the highlights a little bit and then drag down the shadows. And you can also play around with the whites and the blacks. So maybe you would right now like the sun to become, you can see either stronger or weaker whites. And because we turned up the highlights, it became a lot stronger. So I would like to counter that a little bit by dragging down the whites. And I'll probably drag down the blacks as well, because I want to create this really sunset vibe, which means that I want a lot more darker areas. So I'll drag down the blacks a little bit to make sure that it's somewhat more dark. And then you have the presence down here, which is the texture, so you can play around with that. You can see how the palm trees in the background are way more defined if you drag it all the way to the right. And the same way it's way more blurry and unsharp if we just drag it all the way to the left. The clarity slider does the same thing, but you can see how it affects the photo as well in terms of the brightness. So that's why you should be a little bit careful with the clarity. It does affect the entire photo, or at least the brighter areas, whereas the texture only affects the details of the photo. I usually leave them be as well for the beginning, and I do use texture and clarity on masking, which is the extra tip I'll give you in the end of this tutorial. And then you have, you also have a dehaze, which will look really weird right now, but if you have shot in like fog condition in the morning where there's a lot of mist, dehaze helps you to either add or remove some of that haze so that you can see more of what's behind the mist or the haze, or maybe make it even thicker if you want that kind of like mystical vibe. Don't have a photo to show you that, but that's sort of like the only time where I use the dehaze. And then you have vibrance and saturation. Vibrance makes the colors more saturated or not, whereas the saturation makes the entire image more or less saturated. So you can see with the vibrance, you still have some colors left. So it's mostly just the vibrance of the, as the slide says, the vibrance of the colors, whereas the saturation is everything, and it goes black and white if you turn it all the way down. Alright, let's leave it as this for now. So basically what I did was to mess with the highlight, shadow and whites and blacks, which is what I normally do. Then we have the calibration, which calibrates the colors. So what that means is you have the red, the green and blue hues, which are the primary colors. And this helps to drag the colors a little more together so that they look more similar, and that can create like a more consistent look into your edit, but also help you to tone down some of the different colors that you have in your photo, not to make it too colorful if you don't want that. So what I usually do is drag it all the way to the right and all the way to the left and look at how I like the edit better. So for my sunset shots, I usually want them more red than I want them orange. You can see it goes yellow when I turn it all the way to the right. So I'll do it slightly to the left. I usually don't go beyond 20 on either direction, and I actually usually leave it just around 10 because I don't want it to be a huge effect. I just want it to be a slight difference and have a little more cohesive feel to the colors. The saturation does what it says. It saturates the red in the color, in the photo, sorry. And I usually just drag that into the same direction of like -10 or -20 or +10 or +20. You can do it the other way, that will look good as well, but I kind of like to fade the look a little bit with that. Same goes with the greens. Again, I like the red vibes a little more, so I will do it a little more to the right and do the same for the saturation. And for the blue, we'll see how that looks, and we'll probably tone that down to like -10 as well, and do the same for the saturation. See if we can hit that. You can also just type here and then type in what you want. So now we have -10. You can see it's made slight differences. It's not a lot, but it's made it more in the red tones rather than just being more orange, which is how I like to edit my photos. The next part is the color grading part. And what I usually do, so it's always looking at all three at the beginning. What I do is I go into the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights myself. And what I like to do is to create, for some photos, not for all, but especially my landscape photos, I like to create some more color balance and some more color contrast. And that's what the color grading panel is quite good for. So what I basically do is usually introduce some more blue in the shadows, and usually do like a turquoise hint, and then I drag it all the way down, so I only have like a saturation of 5 or something, which creates a little more blue in the shadows. You can see how it's not a lot, but it's created a little bit more of a blue shade. And then I usually go to the highlights, and I'll add some color. And you can see like if I add the yellow in the highlights, it's more or less around the sun, and the same goes for the red. I think I'll introduce a little more yellow again into that. We'll maybe do it a little bit stronger. Most often I just do it like saturation 2 to 5, as you can see down here. But maybe we'll drag it up a little bit more just to have a little more contrast in the colors. Colors that we actually removed before with the calibration, but now we're bringing them back a little bit to create some more nuance and some more feel to the sky, so that not just orange or red for that matter. And then for the midtones we can do sort of like the same thing. And right now it looks very bad, but then we drag it down all the way to the bottom, maybe saturation 4, and I think that looks pretty good. So not a huge difference as you can see, but it has added a little bit of color, and you can of course do more or less. I just like to add a little bit for the feel and the contrast to the photo, and not a lot, not to make it too unrealistic. The third to last section that we have is the color panel. I like to split it up in the HSL and then do hue, saturation, luminance one at a time. So what you do here is you have your different hues, and you can change the different hue of the different colors. So we have the reds. If I drag them all the way to the right, you'll see it becomes yellow. Drag it all the way to the left and it becomes very pinkish red. So the thing you want to do here is try to find the balance where you think it looks good. I think it looks good, a little drag to the left. Then we have some oranges that we might want to do just a little more to the yellow side, just to make that a little more yellow in here. And then the yellows, we can see how that affects the middle in here. So when we drag that back and forth, I think it looks better if we drag it to the green side. And then what I usually do is drag the other sliders to the right to the left to see if it has any impact. The greens, there are no greens in the color, in the photo, so we don't have anything there. For the aqua colors, we don't seem to have anything else either. And for the blue ones, you can see that we have the wave, also because we added a little bit of blue in the color grading. And I don't really like any particular way, so I think I'll just drag it a little bit towards the turquoise side, the aqua side, and then leave it be as that. I don't think we have any purples, no. I don't think we have any magenta either, no. So now we also know what colors we should fiddle with in the other ones. So we have the saturation that controls the saturation of each color, which is basically the strength of the color. So if you drag it all the way to the right, it becomes very vibrant and very saturated, and then if you drag it all the way to the left, it looks very boring and sad and almost like horror-like. But what I like to do is, I think when we're set here, the colors are a little bit strong on the yellow and the red side, so I'll just drag it down a tiny bit just to create a little bit more of that feel. Maybe actually drag down the oranges and drag up the reds a little bit, and then the yellows we will drag. Don't really see a big impact on that, to be honest. And then the blues we'll probably drag that down just a little bit to make sure that it's not too saturated. And then for the luminance, you change the light of the color. You can see how it comes brighter and darker if you drag it to the left or to the right. So I think we'll drag the red ones a little bit to the right, the orange probably a little bit to the right as well, and the blue I'll probably drag down just a little bit. So what we've done now is we've created some more contrast in the colors as well, some more light in the middle, a little more light up here. We tone down the oranges or the yellows a little bit. We go to the detail panel next, and if you hold down your Option key, at least if you have a Mac, you can drag this one to the right and you'll actually see the details being outlined. What I like to do here is to drag it to a point where I think, okay, this is the part I want detailed. So at this photo it looks good at 55, and then I'll drag up the sharpening. It doesn't really do a lot, but to see the photo here, you can see, you can select where you want to see this. It was black before because we were sat somewhere in here, I think. Now you can see how this changes the details a little bit, and I like to drag it up quite far because I want the details to be there, but it's only affecting the area that are white now. So we're only affecting slightly the sky, the clouds and the sun, a lot of the palm trees, and a little bit of the reflection in the water in the front, which I quite like. So I think that's good. You can't really see the subtle difference. If we zoom in, you can probably see it a little more, how they're more blurred out and now how they're more detailed. So that's how you can work with the detail panel as well. You also have noise reduction down here, so if you shot in poor conditions, you can reduce the noise by dragging it up. Just be aware that it normally makes your photo looks more blurry. It doesn't seem to do a big thing with this photo, but if you have a lot of noise, it will soften out the photo and make it look less good. But usually if you drag it up to like 10 or 20, it'll look a lot better if you have a lot of noise, and then it'll still have the details of the photo and of what you wanted. The effects I don't really use a lot, but I include it because we have the grain, and if you want grain added to your photo, like this nostalgic, stylistic kind of feel that you can add, then go ahead and do that. I don't really use it myself. Some things that it creates more detail. It does definitely. I don't dislike the way to do it, I just don't personally prefer to do it. So I leave it as B, but this is where you find the grain tool as well, the slider here. Great. I think the edit looks pretty good now. You can always hit the Y key on your keyboard, and then you can see the before and the after, so you can see what we've done with the photo. Most of it we did in the beginning with the contrast, but we also edited the colors a little bit. And maybe the sun has even become a little bit too washed out now, but I actually kind of like how it looks and how it's got this sunset feel of a dark night or a dark sunset. I feel that I really like to it. And then you can go ahead and edit from that. We'll press the Y key again to get back. And what I sometimes do when I come back here is go back to the tone curve and maybe put up the highlights a little bit more, drag up the midtones, and maybe drag down. No, I think we were actually fine with the blacks. What you can do as well is drag this one up. You see how we create this faded look. So if you've seen this look on maybe Instagram and some photographers, feel like, oh, how are they getting this faded look in their blacks? This is how you can do it. I did it for a while myself, and I don't do it that often anymore. But sometimes I drag it up just a little bit, like here. No, not maybe like here. just to create a little bit of that faded look in the blacks. And what you can see in the histogram as well is it pushes the blacks to the right. So we don't have anything that's true black now, it's more like a gray gradient. If we drag it all the way down again, you can see now some of the blacks are probably also without detail, probably down here. We don't have any detail in these blacks, but that's okay because I don't really need the details down there. Alright, I am quite satisfied with the edit, and this was a tutorial on doing sort of like a basic edit as well, so I think this will do quite well for you if you follow that along and you can do your own adjustments. The thing I said in the beginning is you really need to just get a feel of the tool and do all the different sections a lot of the times, go back and forth between them, but I kind of like to go through them in this order and then come back to the tone curve and the basics, sometimes go back to maybe the color grading and the colors and do the details there. And then just to quickly add a little bit of bonus, you have the crop tool. If you want to crop for Instagram, the 4:5 is the way to go. That's how you get the most real estate on Instagram for your photos. So I'll probably crop it somewhere like this, maybe even a little bit lower, just to get rid of that black in the sky on top. And then you have the heal tool. I'd not suggest you, or the spot removal tool, I would not suggest you use this in Lightroom. It does work. You can resize it a little bit and then click, and it will actually remove the palm tree that we had there. It did quite decent job now. You can sort of see the outline, but it's difficult to see from afar. Pressing Command C to get back, but I suggested you use the heal tool in Photoshop to do that. You can click and then say edit in, and then edit in Adobe Photoshop. It'll drag it into Photoshop. You can also click Command E as a shortcut and then get it directly into Photoshop. When you save it, it'll save it back into Lightroom and do a copy here. And instead of being my raw files are called CR3, it'll make a TIFF instead, which is the highest quality file format for photos that you can have. And then you'll have the copy in here with the whatever healing or spot removal you've done. And I'll do a tutorial on that at some point, but you can definitely find that on YouTube as well. The eye removal, the red eye removal tool, I don't really use. It's been a very long time since I've had the need for that. And then the last thing in here is your masking tools. You have a lot of different options here. And for a landscape shot like this, maybe a linear gradient could be nice. You can drag that up. You'll see you get the basics tab again with a little added features of sharpness, noise reduction, and stuff like that. And then you can actually just drag down your shadows, maybe drag down your blacks a little bit, and then maybe drag up to the highlights and then create some more contrast. You can see what that did. We create a little more contrast. Maybe you want to create another mask and do a linear grade, and then if you increase the highlights, maybe that looks a little bit better. See the before and after on that. I like that quite a lot. You could also do maybe a radial gradient here in the middle, and then tone down the white some more, maybe tone down the highlights to emphasize the sun again, and you can see how that affected that part of the image then, because that's the area that we selected. So I think this photo is done now. So the tutorial ended quite abrupt. My camera died from battery, and then I didn't have time to record anymore. I was going to show one more thing, but that is going to have to wait to another tutorial. This was my first time doing this, and I definitely learned a lot. I think it was a little bit too big of a mouthful, to be honest. It became quite a long tutorial, and there's a lot of things that I wanted to include that I didn't. And there's also a lot of things that I probably said that could have been cut down. If you made it this far to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you still got something out of it, that you liked it, and you can get started with Lightroom. I will definitely be doing more tutorials, and I've tried to keep them shorter and make a playlist about it. So you can watch this one and then you can continue with the rest. I'll also be doing a lot of travel videos and showing places around. I just captured a lot of content from my past 2 days where I've been going on some trips. So if you are keen on seeing more and you want to follow along, then hit the subscribe button and like the video below. It does really help. I'm just getting started, so let's see what this turns into. There's a learning curve to everything basically, and yeah, I'm just happy to get started and happy to share these videos with you now. And hopefully we can make a lot of cool stuff in the future. See you soon.